Hello, everyone. This is episode 2 of As Above, So Belove. We have Noble Intent here with us again. Hi, Noble.
Greetings and salutations on the other side of the pond. How are you, Àrmunn?
All good, all good. And you as well, I hope?
Oh man, life is good.
Excellent. So we're going to pick up where we left off. We finished with Sun, Ascendant, and Moon. And so we're going to go into the rest of the planets, at least, their meanings in a chart. And we'll see where it goes from there. Of course, we're using here my chart as an example, merely an example, to better convey and better explain the aspects that we're going to go into. So, Noble, next up is Mercury, right? Can you point to Mercury there on that chart of that beautiful guy over there?
You
That's,
got it.
yeah.
Isn't he
All right.
cute?
Yeah. So go into Mercury. Of course, there's the mythology of Mercury, a Roman god, which is equivalent to Hermes in Greek. But how does it relate to the astrological Mercury?
Related, no doubt.
Hmm.
Mercury the messenger,
Hmm.
Mercury the communicator, Mercury the mind, the intellect, um, Mercury that bridges the above with the below, the upper worlds and the underworlds, this type of thing. Mercury's the if you think about the Nike the Nike tennis shoe, right? With the shoes with the wings on the feet. Mercury moves fast. Mercury is swift, and Mercury is relevant in this age of the mind, right? The age of the intellect. Um, and so, yes, Mercury represents um, all of the things that I just mentioned. And so as we make our way through our natal chart and we land on Mercury, we can draw those themes out. And so in your particular case, Mercury happens to be in the seventh house, in the house of the other. And so, it would suggest things like, hey, you like to communicate um, with the other, with your love, or to speak um, to her, with her, um, and or about her, this type of thing. But
Hmm.
at any rate, Mercury is quite relevant for me because I have a Virgo ascendant, and Mercury rules Virgo. Mercury also rules Gemini, and so Mercury would be considered my ascendant ruler and also my chart ruler. So I have a lot of familiarity with Mercury. In fact, my wife, my daughters, my sisters all suggest to me from time to time that I have far too much Mercury. So, um, any thoughts or questions come to mind with regards to Mercury?
Yeah, so in what way, because of course, saying, for example, Mercury is the mind is a bit of a broad statement because, in a way, all of the chart is mind, several aspects of the mind, because even, the moon, although it's emotional, it's the emotional mind, for example, that kind of thing, right? So, it's probably what you would consider the way we think. Would that be incorrect to say? The way we construct our thoughts when we talk to ourselves in the internal dialogue, perhaps. Would that be more accurate to define?
Yeah, right. And then shared meaning with regards to um, certain words I think is important, right? And of course, yes, I think that that's a fair comment. It's this is yeah, how are we framing up our thoughts? The
Mm.
the thinking part of the mind. Yes, it would be um the formulation. of words via thought.
Mm.
And then ultimately the method by which well, of course, that is subject to many other elements within us, but Mercury represents communication, which tends to be masculine. Yeah. So,
Mm.
the very act of project. So we formulate our thoughts with the thinking mind, um, ultimately in the form of language, and then we share those um, with words. And so yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, yes. And I would also add, for example, that Mercury, being the closest to the sun, never moves too far from the sun. At least that is the perspective that I was once told. I don't know if that is absolutely accurate, but never moves away more than two houses, I believe, something like that. And it's a sort of, therefore, also a symbol in a way for Icarus, no? It's always too close to the sun, and it can either be burned by the sun or be empowered by it. Would this have any meaning in astrology?
Oh, considerable meaning, actually.
Mm.
Although to the contemporary astrologer, perhaps not, actually. There's a phenomena which we call a cazimi, and that
Mm.
is when the planet Mercury is in the rays of the sun. Depending on the astrologer, that can be from, say, 10 degrees up to 15 degrees. In fact, Mercury is just emerging out of the rays or the beams of the sun now.
Mm.
Both Mercury and Venus, well, in addition to Mars, actually all went through Cazimis recently. And
Mm.
in other words, they are going through their what we call a synodic reset and starting a new cycle, which is quite relevant given the Saturn Neptune at Aries conjunction that we've been talking about well, offline. I'm not sure if we got into that last time, but we certainly
Mm.
will get into it as we press closer to the big day on February the 20th. But no, thank you for pointing that out. That's a quite important thought to share. Venus also does not stray too awful far from the sun. So the
Mm.
Mercury and Venus, yes, they're usually within close proximity of the sun, and uh, which we can think of, um, well, in some respects, we can think about Mercury, the masculine principle of Mercury and the feminine principle of Venus, and the sun being in the center. In fact, in the
Mm.
chart right now, we can see that play out a little bit. So anyway, good point.
Right, right. Because I've heard, and I don't know how accurate this is and if it's traditional or not traditional or modern or whatever, but I've heard that certain planets, when they are close enough, like you said, in Cazimi or in within certain degrees of the sun, if they are in a certain position, they can lose power to the sun, and if they are in another position in that conjunction, they can be empowered by the sun. I don't know if you're familiar with what I'm saying or if it's, complete trash that I heard. And if you can comment on that. Would that be something that applies?
Yeah, yeah, and it's so that is the nature of the Kazemi. We can relate it to the death and rebirth process, and so
Mm.
one boy, we have we meaning popular culture today's culture tends to have a very negative understanding of death, and we
Mm.
associate it. Most of us associate this with physical death, not in the way it's really meant, although it can represent physical death, and the natal chart can point to this towards the end of our life, no doubt.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, the death and rebirth process, which is synonymous with Kazemi, um,
Right.
and the synodic reset, yes, we undergo the death of the old self, the death represented by the previous cycle, only to give way and to give birth to the new cycle. And so really that can stand in, to your point, of empowering or its opposite,
Right.
and so yes, certainly true.
Okay. So using that example over there that is on the screen, and knowing the subject, at least to a certain extent as you do, what would be the meaning of that Mercury in Aries, and in red it appears to be retrograde, for this particular chart?
Well, the okay, so what we're looking at, just to be clear for those that are out there in the watching us and tuning in here, we're looking at Àrmunn's natal chart. So this was a snapshot in time at the time of his birth. And so during the time of his birth, the planet Mercury was in the sign of Aries in his seventh house, which is the house of the other, and it happened to be in retrograde. Excuse me. Uh, Mercury, as many of us are aware, because it happens several times every year, retrogrades. And so what does this mean? I think it's important to
Hmm.
discuss what retrograde means. So first and foremost, the planets go in a forward or a direct motion, and so as we look at the natal chart, the and let's see, I can actually demonstrate this for you. Well, I don't have it locked, but the planets appear to be moving in a counterclockwise direction. And so if I was to advance us, say, let's just move us up a month. And where did our Mercury go?
Yeah, it's further on in Aries.
Yes, yes. So let me jump back out of here. So at any rate, Mercury goes in the direct motion, and then it stations, which essentially means it stops and it moves in retrograde. And so the process of retrograde would be equivalent to the process of in reflection, and more of a, think of retrograde as an internal
Hmm.
movement. And so as we're moving direct, um, as Mercury is moving direct, we are experience a certain set of circumstances. In Mercury's case, a certain set of thoughts. We're having conversations, in your case, with the other,
Mm.
when the planet Mercury is going direct, and so we essentially we are approaching a set of circumstances for the first time. If you think about it, the nature of retro, or going in reverse, or reflecting, recapitulating, going back over. And so again, the planet Mercury stops, it stations, and it goes literally in the sky, it goes backwards. And so what this essentially means is as Mercury goes retrograde, it is going to revisit or go back over the same topics or the same themes or the same thoughts in the case of Mercury, or the same communication that was brought forth in the direct motion. And this is
Hmm.
very, very important. Um, Essentially what this means is this brings us back to the all-powerful three, the Holy Trinity, right? So if it,
Mm.
so it, when Mercury is in direct, it passes through the circumstance for the first time, then it goes in retrograde, it passes back over the same communication point, thought, etc., and then it stations again and goes back direct over the same set of communications, ideas, thoughts that it did for a third time. The idea would be for one in particular, as we go through Mercury going direct back over the same point or the same topic areas that it retrograded over for the third time, is that we're going to be better equipped with handling said topics
Right.
with the other, for example, in your case. Does that make sense?
I understand. Yes. So it would be basically direct would be empirical direct experience, while retrograde would be the study of such experience that was already, passed over, right? So it would be like I study what I experienced, what I went through in that regard, right? So retrograde would be more internalized, like you said. It would come more from the inner psyche than from just the interaction, direct interaction with the external, correct?
That's absolutely correct. And so,
Mm,
in your case, having Mercury be in retrograde at the time of your birth, it tends to suggest that you're contemplative. It tends to
mhm.
introspective, um, internalize in your thinking. And of course, um, we know this about you. Yes,
Mm,
we understand
mhm,
this given the body of work that you put forth on YouTube, for example, or
mhm.
Odyssey, and your contemplations that you share. And so,
Yeah.
yes, you come by it honestly, brother, and that's exactly what's going on. In a perfect world, as you emerge out of your contemplation, out of your reflection, and return direct and go back in other words, in your case, when you are ready to share your contemplations with others, in this case,
Right.
literally with the other, with Seo, but as you are ready to share your contemplations with the world in the form of a podcast, um, then you do so. And so, of
Right.
course, even though the Mercury is in retrograde in your natal chart, as we use tools like progressions and what have you, as we proceed forth in our respective lifetimes, of course, Mercury does literally go direct, and you get prepared to share
Mhm.
your thoughts with others.
Right. 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 So, in this case, and of course we will go into the signs later on, but in this case, just to before we move on to Venus, a Mercury in Aries would be a very uh, direct kind of mind that, however, is at the same time introspective. So, how would you put together these two apparently contradictory aspects? And I know that this chart is very contradictory because of the Libra ascendant. So every house is is usually is in its opposite, right? So supposed opposite. So, but how would you, as an astrologer, conjunct these two apparently opposite aspects?
You're in total contrast, yes, in every aspect of your life, brother. Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
So okay, so um, Aries in the seventh, literally the seventh represents the other. Now,
Hmm.
what we find is, in particular, in the house of the other, or the seventh house, that Aries can represent literally the other. And so your partner, this doesn't necessarily have to be the romantic partner, although it tends to be, could be a close business associate, for example,
Hmm.
or a very dear long-term friend. But oftentimes it is the romantic partner. The Aries energy you can seek out potentially the Aries energy in the other. Um, or you can play out the Aries energy in you, in
Right.
the house of the other, or in the relationship. And
Hmm.
so um, you and your partner can probably understand almost immediately who tends to play that role, um, or not.
Hmm.
It's food for thought. for contemplation. But at any rate, yes. So Mercury is going to be introspective. But when it's ready to speak, it's going to speak directly. And
Right.
so one would say that this is not a bad pairing, frankly, because Aries tends to speak without thinking. Aries tends to act uh, quickly. Aries tends not to need the reflection of the other, or the validation or the okay, it's okay to speak. Aries just tends to speak. And so when in your case, knowing you, the fact that you have the beautiful planet that represents thought and communication, um, etc., in retrograde, it tends to us, and I think that we can see this in our interactions with you, that you tend to consider your thoughts before you share them,
Mhm.
which is a nice buffer for Aries energy.
Yes, I understand that. And that's a good explanation for that apparently contradictory those two apparent contradictory aspects, even though it must be understood that man is a contradictory animal. And that is why, of course, in the narratives within the world stage, let's say, the binaries are a primary literary device for these because they are so prevalent within our psyches that, of course, they have to externalize it to get our attention. And it could be male, female, it could be left, right, it could be, whatever, black, white, et cetera, exactly to play with the contradictions that we carry within ourselves, right? As we mirror the world or the world mirrors us. It depends on which perspective one takes. But so, all right. So Mercury. Next up, we have Venus. So we were talking about the, let's say, masculine mind. And Venus, would it be appropriate to say, is the feminine mind? Of course, we have the mythology of Venus or Aphrodite as being the goddess of love and so on. But I get the impression, and this is merely intuitive, that Venus isn't particularly emotional, that would be the moon. Venus is a type of mind. Am I wrong in saying that?
Oh, well, tomato, tomato. Now we might get some pushback from some, like if we look at this from the Hermetic principle that all is mind, then we certainly can
Yeah.
uh, speak to it a little bit differently than if we were to take another another approach. But
Yeah,
um,
just for clarification, when I said mind is in the same way that we were defining Mercury as mind. So a thought in the sense of Mercury would be a rational thought, so a sort of inner dialogue, while a thought in Venus or propelled by Venus would be still a thought, but more playing into a kind of bodily, emotional thought, but still a thought per se. Am I wrong? Am I speaking gibberish or?
well, it's interesting that you bring that up. I mean, I suppose we could look at it this way. Now, when I consider what Venus represents, I tend to think about it differently, wholly differently than Mercury, in that it
Hmm.
it represents things that are generally not associated with thought. That said, you use the word mind, right? And so, again, how do what is our shared meaning of mind and all of this? But let me
Uh-huh.
share with you what I think is generally accepted that Venus represents.
Please.
And again, there's different astrologers would assign a little bit different meaning than another. Um, but Venus is beauty. It's symmetry. It tends to represent can represent sexuality, uh, what we value. Um, virtue to some degree. Um, Venus, the Venusian goddess, um, Venus is often relational, actually, and usually when somebody is interested in relational topics, um, romantic relationships in particular, I'm going to look and see what's going on with Venus, both in one's
Mm,
natal chart and in the real-time sky. So um, Venus is beautiful. I love Venus. Venus is the what we call the lesser benefic. Jupiter being the great benefic planet.
mhm.
Venus is the lesser benefic, and generally, for those of you who don't know what benefic means, that's a good thing, right? And so, with you being a Libra ascendant, it's this planet Venus is quite important because Venus rules Libra, and Venus being your ascendant, it makes Venus your ascendant ruler, and also some would say your chart ruler. So this is really quite an important planet in the natal chart of Àrmunn, right? And so the and some questions that arise or some comments with regards to Venus.
Well, it's in a very I don't know if there's an aspect there, but it's in a very unusual placement for Venus to be, right? Aquarius is not where Venus is most comfortable, is it? Or am I wrong there?
Well, let's talk about that. This goes back to your comments related to the mind,
Mm,
and we tend to, or at least I do, tend to associate thought and thinking with the mind. Although I think that that's a little bit myopic. But
mhm,
yeah, does Venus this sensual, um, that which represents beauty, relational, which tends to bring in the ideas of emotionality. I mean, if we think about sensuality, that's one I think it's safe to say, in particular with Valentine's Day yesterday, yeah.
mhm,
Um, and so it's in the sign of the mind, or the fixed masculine is more um, appropriate, but it tends to uh, represent the masculine qualities, which are things like thought, are things like projection,
mm,
and whereas the feminine Venus is the opposite, is it receives feminine. Well, literally think of the womb. It's receptive, it's
mhm,
magnetic, as opposed to the masculine air sign of Aquarius, which is projective. And air literally represents communication, that which is required in order for words to be ejected from our apparatus that allows us to speak. Yeah. And so, no, Venus can be at odds in the sign of Aquarius. That said, it is in a very harmonious aspect uh, to your first house, to Libra. It's essentially its temple, and it is in a beautiful trine by degree with both your ascendant point and Pluto. Let me draw that
mm.
so people can take a look here
So it's 18 degrees on all of them, right?
on all of them.
Mhm,
Yes. And so these are color coded for a reason. And so we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves here, but the yellow represents uh, the masculine air signs within your chart. And we're going to be talking a lot about masculine and feminine, and we're going to be talking a lot about the elements in particular when we go into a deeper dive with the signs. But right
mhm,
now we're speaking about Venus, and yes, Venus is in your fifth house of Aquarius, and so ultimately we would blend the characteristics of the fifth house, um, the characteristics of Venus, the characteristics of Aquarius, and then its relationship in this case to your ascendant is very important because it is again your ascendant and chart ruler. And then we would also look and see how Venus is aspected with other planets and or signs in your house. Excuse me,
Right.
in your chart. And so
Hmm.
we'll get into that in a little bit more detail as we go on.
Right. So, how would you describe, and of course, taking into account, like we've said in the first episode, the subject of the chart, which in this case it's me, how would you describe the characteristics of a Venus in Aquarius, even if we, for now, disregard the trine that you talked about, and just focus on Venus in Aquarius in the fifth house, just as an example for people who, are studying this and coming at this for the first time.
Understood. So,
Hmm.
and it would help us to just briefly summarize the fifth house.
Hmm.
The fifth house is uh, it's naturally ruled. I say naturally. It's associated with Leo,
Hmm.
which is naturally ruled by the sun. And so the fifth house has similar topics to both Leo and the sun. And so it represents our creative expression, our individualized, unique creative expression. And so that's a very nice place, frankly, for Venus to be in. Um, the Oh man, it's escaping me right at this moment. If you'll permit me to take a quick peek. Just
Sure.
let's pause right here. I want to double check my thinking on this. Um, ooh, well, that's, are you seeing my,
No, no. I'm
okay,
just seeing the chart.
okay. Stand by, please.
Hmm.
Uh, Stand by. Ah, okay, perfect. Yeah, I just needed to double check my thinking on this and make sure that I wasn't talking out of school here. Um, so, and you're seeing my chart again?
Yes. Hmm.
Okay. And let's go back and get my little tool here so that I can get you guys a look-see at where we're talking about again. And here is Venus in the fifth. Venus is in what's called its joy in the fifth house. And
Mm.
I needed to double check that. And so whereas the greater benefic Jupiter is in its joy in the 11th house, Venus actually likes to be in the fifth. And the reason is Venus, the planet, again, the beauty, the symmetry, the sensuality, it likes this creative expression. In fact, the Venusian, if you think about the let's see, I think it's the nine of, what is it? The nine of Pentacles.
Mm.
I believe it's the nine of Pentacles, and the beautiful Venetian goddess with the bird, and her and the flowers in her proximity. And so that's Venus expresses herself, right? She's very um and that is what the fifth house is. The fifth house is how does one express themselves in their uniqueness. And so some other characteristics of the fifth house, it's the house of our offspring if we choose to have them, or children in our care. If you think about it, a lot of people, for those of you who have had your own children, can relate to this, I would say, greatly, probably, is our children become, and perhaps this isn't a good thing, but become a part of our creative expression. I think, just think about the way maybe a mother might dress her children um,
Mm.
when they're wee lads and lassies, right? And a mother is going to dress her children in the way she wishes to express herself through her children, right? And so the fifth house, our creative, unique expression, it's also how we spend our time when we have free time, our creative expression in the form of music, in the form of art. How do we play? This is also how we romance. How do we court the other? And the fifth house is our first foray into the world of the sexual expression. How do we interact with the other in the form of romance? And then as we get past the courting stage, and there's an agreement between two consenting adults on it's time to express with one another. We get into the swapping of the sexual energy as well. And so to
Mhm.
have Venus there um, in its joy is a beautiful thing, and it's making a beautiful aspect to your first house, of which it is the ruler. And um, so in other words, it's a nice placement, although as you pointed out, um, it doesn't always uh, Venus is in its exaltation in a water sign in Pisces, right? And
Mm.
so water and air are two very different things. Water uh, is represented by Pisces, right? Or
Mhm.
Pisces is a water sign, and so yeah, I think you rightly pointed out that Venus maybe isn't in its best form, specifically in the sign of Aquarius. Aquarius.
Yeah, it's unconventional at least. So, because Aquarius is unconventional, and when we get to the signs, we'll talk more about Aquarius and the other signs. Yes. So Venus would then be, like you said, the way we have fun, and also what we value in the deepest aesthetic sense, more than just because Mercury can also appreciate beauty, but it would be a more architectural beauty, perhaps, while Venus is a more in-depth aesthetics than Mercury, using Mercury as a contrast because you said one was male, one was female, right?
Yeah, well, let us just turn to the other sign that Venus rules, and that can help us round out the story. So,
Mhm.
as I just pointed out, Venus rules Libra, but it also rules Taurus.
Mhm.
Taurus is the earth. Um, Now we're getting into the world of the comforts of life, or the things that are necessary to, earth can represent shelter. It represents our home, and so the people with strong Venus placements often, let's not, it doesn't need to be opulent. It doesn't need to be Gucci or Rolls Royce, but Venus appreciates comfort, a
Mhm.
nice pillow, right? A comfortable blanket. And so
Mhm.
that would be the where there is the airy appreciation of Libra. Um, there is the literally the creature comforts of Taurus. And so uh anyway, yeah, it's often helpful to look at both of the signs in which a planet represents or rules, looks after, in order to get a full picture, or get the full story.
Right, right. Okay, so next up we have Mars, right? Mars being also a very of course masculine planet. And of course, Mars, Aries in the Greek, of course, Aries here in astrology is a sign, not a planet, but the mythology of Mars is equivalent to the mythology of Aries, in one in Roman, one in Greek. And it's the god of war, the god of conflict, but basically I think it's the god of action in the astrological sense, right? How we act upon the external. Would this be incorrect to state?
No, you tapped on an important characteristic of Mars. Well, many of them, as you associated them with the mythology.
Hmm.
Mars, Martian, martial, war,
Hmm.
most certainly, action, masculine. I mean, it is the representation of the masculine. I mean, if anyone was gonna say, Noble, pick out a planet that represents the masculine, even though the airy Mercury can represent this, and also even Jupiter, as it's associated with the fire sign of Sagittarius, it has a masculine element to it. Mars is the masculine, the projection, the cutting. Mars cuts. It severs, it separates into component parts. Um,
Hmm.
Mars is very well, we are in a very Martian time, a masculine Marsy time in the history of mankind. So it seems, right? Um, Rumors of war, actual war, this types of things. But that doesn't mean that we're all warlike. In fact, knowing you, you aren't. So what does what does the masculine martial um, um, god of war represent for you? Well, it's certainly, as you pointed out, it represents action, taking
Hmm.
action, initiation of action, right? And it
Hmm.
it, it happens to be um, uh, uh, in the sixth house for you, which is the house of chop wood and carry water. So the sixth
Hmm.
house is the house of our daily routine. Often this is associated with um, the our vocation, because most of us spend a hell of a lot of our day or our time associated with our career or our vocation. Um, but for say a full-time mother, it would represent mothering and rearing children, for example. Um, for a contemplative or somebody that is a researcher or a writer or a musician or the a deep thinker, a meditator, it would represent having the drive, the initiation, the action orientated towards movement in those respective areas. And so whatever it is that you do, Armin,
Hmm.
is powered, for lack of a better, driven by the Martian energy. Now, at the same time, um, that it's driven by this masculine Mars, this sixth house, it's also tempered by, softened by, uh, regulated by the sign of the water sign of Pisces, right? And so,
Hmm.
in the same way, we identified that Mercury, your reflective retrograde Mercury tempers the fiery, impulsive Aries. The Martian energy is tempered by the Pacific Ocean, which is often the metaphor that I use for Pisces, right? And I'd say that's a good thing. That
They
that
got sharks there. They got sharks there in the Pacific.
well, there's whales and sharks and all sorts of stuff, and no doubt your other would probably help us to understand what your sharks are.
Yeah,
Uh,
but it's yeah, it's an unusual placement again for Mars to be. I don't think it's very comfortable there. But at the same time, if we consider, because we have to step out of the concepts that were placed there in terms of narrative. And for example, to consider that Mars would be aggression or war, or that for example, you were talking about career. Uh, Things like war, things like career, I don't think exist organically. These are concepts that are secondary, imaginations of man that are placed as if they were real, right? And so, yes, conflict exists, action exists, work in the sense of an effort to make something, to build something, etc., exists, but not in the terms defined by the external narrative, let's say, the artificial narrative, we could also say. So in this case, I always like to see Mars as how we take action, and that action can be, just catching the bus, or some deeper action that we need to take, a decision, whatever it is, right? An initiation of something that will have, a continuation later on. But Mars would be that initiation. Perhaps, it would be picked up later on by Jupiter. For example, I'm just saying what intuitively I see. But if we consider Mars to be action, the actual interaction with the world in an organic sense, and if we remove a bit that value of war and conflict and so on, which also exists in life, but not war as we see it. War is an all-out machine-like conflict, while conflict is a mere, you have a falling out with someone, and that can require an aggressive response. But if we put it in those terms, how would the position of Mars, and of course, not here in particular in Pisces, we can go into that as well, but in any chart, how would the position of Mars dictate the type of action that that particular individual takes on the world, the way he initiates action onto the world?
Oh, well, those are all good thoughts, very good thoughts. And I think that well, I've got a couple of thoughts in response to some of your ideas there, brother.
Mm,
And one is so think about the act of discernment. Um,
mhm,
think in fact, which is in your case is a part of the contemplative process. And I certainly don't want to tell you about your contemplative process, but as uh, let me try to relate it in a way that's familiar to me, and then so and see if it lines up with some other ways for us to think about Mars. But when I mentioned that Mars cuts, it separates, and so it's which one of the biblical scriptures? It's separating the wheat from the chaff. Um,
mhm,
it's so Mars it projects, and so we either consciously or unconsciously project things outside of ourselves or even within our mind's eye, but we create separation between that which is discriminating against or um, parsing, separating, judging, um, discerning, right? We separate ourselves maybe being the higher self, and in your vernacular, the ego
mhm,
is making a discernment or a judgment between something that is separate from itself or several things that are separate from itself. And just knowing you, I know that you do this on the regular, where you take in lots of data, lots of information, um, across a large swath of sources and whatnot, and you go through a discernment process. Part of that process would engage the your martial quality. Okay, so you're
mhm,
not necessarily going to war on the battlefield, the literal Gettysburg,
mhm,
in that way, but you're going through a process of cutting and separation, and you're saying, okay, goes into this section, maybe something that you might consider to be true or truthful or real, and this goes into another section that I'm designating as not true, as maybe
Mhm.
conscripted or fake, this type of thing. And
Right.
so and then, so yeah, so that would be another way for us to think about this Martian energy. But I think you nailed it when you really relate it to us taking action. I think that that's probably one of the first ones that I think about when I'm thinking of Mars. And so what this means is, being in your sixth house, the sixth house of your daily routine, is that uh, say probably sometimes in your lifetime when you going through a bad transits, or perhaps you've been a funk, that generally speaking, um, you can take action in a given day, uh,
Mhm.
based on the goals and objectives of that day, or whatever your project is at the time. Is that fair assessment?
Well, yeah. But that links also with other things because I can take action unexpectedly, even for me, in the sense of it is not a planned something that I completely lay out as, okay, on, Monday I will do this, on Tuesday I will do that, and on Wednesday I will do the other. It is something that I know is the moment to act, right? And it could be in response to something, or it can be something that, even though there's no external stimuli to respond to, that I internally understand. It's like an alarm. I understand this is the moment, right? And it could be something as simple as, mention something to someone. Like for example, in the first episode, you were talking about the diplomacy of Libra, right? And often that makes you retract from saying something. But on that day, you just know unexpectedly, it wasn't planned, that this is the day to bring up that subject, to bring up that thing that you had been considering and that you hadn't yet externalized. So Mars is, in the way I view it, and correct me if I'm wrong, the way we externalize these things, and also when we externalize these things, when we decide to act and how we decide to act, and how that action then takes place, right? And of course, being colored here by Pisces, it's not going to be very aggressive either in that sense, but it's probably going to be always a deeper action. At least that's the way that I see in myself.
Yeah, no doubt. And so this intuitive quality, so reflecting on what you said, or restating what you said, is you, excuse me, you suggested that um, there's an intuitive component within you that emerges, and then it can come out of nowhere,
Mhm.
or it can be very quick. This notion within you to act, don't act, turn left, turn right, um, can happen out of nowhere, and really we can see this in your chart in a couple of ways. So let me point that out. Number one, yes, Mars is colored by Pisces. It's colored by a water sign. If they're the feminine water signs are very much associated with one's intuition. Um, People who have strong water placements are intuitive, and of course you have. Let's just point this out for people here. Get get rid of that and grab our circle again and just make it a little bit bigger.
Mhm.
Um, so Mars is in proximity to your sun. The sun, your sun sign, which we talked about last week, is in the house, excuse me, in the sign of Pisces. Pisces is really quite an intuitive. Um, Pisces, in quotes, tend to be they tend to be intuitive, frankly speaking, or individuals that have a lot of water placements or significant water placements tend to have this quality. And so in addition to that, an intuitive quality that you draw on, um, um, as Mars take action, you also have a oh, that's not a very good line, is it? I thought I thought I had my my magic wand that straightens. There we go. I'm gonna get rid of that one because
Yeah.
I'm a Virgo and Virgos are precise. So yeah, you're also in a trine, uh, with you're in a loose trine with Uranus. And so Uranus is the epitome of surprise. Uranus is the epitome of out of nowhere. And so everything you just said can be seen quite clearly in your chart. Your I mean, let's just really recap it really quick. Your tendency, your Aries tendencies, the Arian tendency within you is tempered by a reflective Mercury. The Martian, aggressive, sometimes compulsive, right?
Mm,
Externalization, action is tempered by your intuition, which is represented by Pisces. In trine, to Uranus, which suggests even though it's tempered, by your intuition, the surprise notion, that you can bring into a conversation or into your life, um, because it's of an intuitive quality, tends to be received well by the other. Um,
mm.
does that make sense?
Yes, yes. Yes, I think so. I think it does. I think it does. And so it would be, uh, it's something that's due to the normal indoctrination we all go through. It's something that I had to learn about myself, was to trust that those moments, trust the moments when things become clear, whether, of course, I didn't know in these terms whether they come from Uranus or from Pisces or from whatever. I, of course, didn't have that logically present in mind, but was to trust that there are moments when I know, right? And to trust that knowing was something that I had to develop due to, all the quote unquote learning or indoctrination that of the expectations within a certain doctrinal framework, let's put it like that, of society. Um, but yes, it does offer a lot of unexpected qualities that usually, yes, turn out to have a positive effect. Yes, indeed.
So, but you just brought up a really important point, and really I think it's literally the point of this series that we're doing, or at least it's
Hmm.
one of my objectives in accepting your beautiful invitation to do this is to know with the
Hmm.
capital, K. It's to know, and this intuitive faculty within us uh, tends to point more to the knowing, to the gnosis. At least I've found that in myself, as opposed to some of the other faculties that we lean into as human beings. Um, and you have a signature that suggests that you have a over your journeys, over your trips, over your incarnations, you've developed this intuition, which allows you to recognize knowledge or gnosis or truth at the ready. I would like to point out, for the benefit of this particular topic that we're on, because it's such an important one that you just raised, just another reason why you come by this honestly. And I just gave you this little, oh, look at that. Man, I tell you what, it's terrible. Uh, got to get rid of that. I'm going to see if I can do better this time here.
You got to walk the straight and narrow, man.
Exactly. Okay, we just spoke to the trine, which is a harmonious aspect from two water signs. Actually, the elements are in a natural trine. So any astrologers who are listening to this, don't think that I'm off my rocker here, because what I would like to do is point out um, this one here, this trine. So again, the water signs, your fire signs, your earth signs, and your air signs are all in trine to one another.
Hmm.
But what I'm bringing to our attention here is the fact that you have Uranus in a fairly close proximity by degree. It's at 20 degrees, and we're talking about Mars right now.
Hmm.
In your sixth house is at 15 degrees. It's just a little bit outside of the orb that we would generally recognize as a trine by degree.
Hmm.
Usually that's 3 degrees. In a natal chart, sometimes we'll broaden that out to 5 to 7. Some would even say 10. But
Hmm.
what I wanted to bring to your attention is Jupiter. And we're going to get to Jupiter next, are we not? Is that next
Yes.
up to
Uh-huh.
back?
Yes.
Okay, so
Hmm.
this is going to be a beautiful segue. And so, um, as I'm dissecting or helping you to understand your sixth house, for example, we were just speaking about Mars, and we were talking about how Mars is tempered by water. It's colored by water, was your words.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
it's, someone say softened. And then we got into the intuitive nature that you've developed over time, which allows you to um, you're comfortable in sharing your intuitions, it seems, projecting those, which is that Martian quality. But it's
Hmm.
also, it's the picture is, we can look deeper, and we can ask ourselves, okay, what is the traditional ruler of Pisces? The traditional ruler of Pisces is Jupiter.
Hmm.
Where's Jupiter in your chart? Well,
Yeah.
Jupiter is in a water sign. Jupiter is in Cancer. It happens to be in your 10th house, um, which is in a natural trine with your sixth house. And so, and it's in a natural trine, for what it's worth, with your second house. And so the Jupiterian quality, um, is going to be, so you're, let's just say you're well aspected, would be one way to say that. And so your
Mm.
sixth house is well, it's well aspected in that it's an unfavorable harmonious aspect to the outer planet of Uranus here, and also
Mm.
the its ruler, the sixth house ruler of Jupiter, which is the great benefic, which suggests that your sixth house of your daily routine, I think it's appropriate to speak to what else the sixth house represents. The
Mm.
sixth house represents our daily routine, which lends to the topic of our health. If you think about it, our health, for those of us who take care of ourselves in our daily routine, we become healthy, right? For those of us who don't, well, we become unhealthy or we become sickly, which brings us to the third and most important, in my estimation, characteristic of the sixth house, which is service to others, acts
Mhm.
of humanity, right? And so when we have a routine that is well sorted, we are healthy, our bucket is full, and so therefore we can fill other people's buckets. And so you can bring this intuitive quality to bear, brother, in the
Mhm.
service of others. And you literally, you come by this honestly, because the host of your sixth house is Jupiter, and it's in well within sight in a beautiful trine in another water sign, which heightens and accentuates the intuitive quality of you back,
Mhm.
not only into the topics of the sixth house, which service to others, but on all the other topics of life.
Right. And Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, right? If I'm not mistaken.
And Jupiter, on top of it all, is exalted in Cancer. Indeed, it is.
Right.
Um, and as we'll get to, just a quick sneak peek here. Let's see. I just moved things around on you guys. Oh, and I don't have, I'm not going to go there right now. just confuse people. But yes, Jupiter is in the real-time clock is in Cancer right now. And
Right.
so, yes, and so Jupiter currently in the real-time clock up there in the sky right now is in its exaltation in Cancer.
Yes. And so if okay, this was and thank you for that. It's good to know that I'm well aspected, but for the sake of, the explanations, let's imagine that these planets were discordant, so not in a good position relative to one another. What would that reflect in regards to that individual? For example, in the example I gave, my intuition would go wrong, or what would be? Imagine that instead of a trine, it was, I don't know, a square, right?
Yeah.
What would that for? Of course, this is theory, but how would that more or less, in of course a vague manner, because there's no actual subject here on the chart, but how would that play out for that individual, more or less?
Yeah, yeah, you got it. So, um, let's just go real world here.
Hmm.
Um, uh-oh. Ah, look at that. It
Yeah.
straightened it out for me. Thank goodness. Okay, so um aspects or angles are these you hear people talk about transits and aspects and it's understood by the angle between two things generally. So we were just speaking about a trine aspect, which is 120 degrees between your Mars and Uranus, for example, or
Hmm.
it's by degree. It's not in close enough proximity. Um, but the a Hellenistic astrologer would talk about trines um, by sign in addition to
Hmm.
trines by degree. So technically, your your sixth house and your 10th house, these two water houses, Jupiter and um, Mars are in trine by degree. And so that's generally what we consider to be a favorable, harmonious aspect. But you just asked me, okay, well, what if, how could that express itself differently if it was in an unfavorable aspect, right?
Hmm.
And now we can get into what we call squares or oppositions, right? And
Hmm.
what I've just drawn on the chart here is an opposition. And
Hmm.
so in your case, and again, we're getting we're outside the normal orb by degree that I might consider as super relevant and important, but for the sake of your question and an example, um, arguably Mars or your sixth house is in opposition, right, to your 12th house. And you have Saturn at 9 degrees and you have Mars at 15 degrees. So this would suggest something of the nature of occasionally your intuitive faculty that we just discussed,
Hmm.
which is tempers your Martian projection, either via, your written word or your words or your reaction to somebody. That generally it softens or tempers it. Um, the Saturnian energy at times could come into play. Saturnian, whereas Jupiter is the great benefic, Saturn is the great malefic, and I think Saturn gets a bad rap, and we'll talk about that more when we talk about Saturn. But
Hmm.
Saturn can bring up characteristics of fear or
Mm.
anxiety or caution, and so whereas your Martian um, action projection can be tempered by these other intuitive qualities, it also could be tempered by fear or caution.
Right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
that's a different expression of Mars.
Okay. Yes, like we talked in the first episode, that there was this, that Libra quality couldn't always, manifest, in the sense that I had a hard time saying what needed to be said and preferred to, keep the peace, even when perhaps action was needed and a conversation, a difficult conversation was necessary at a certain point. So that could be, for example, a good example of, it's not unfavorable because in truth it works, it plays out for the same, but it can be seen as unfavorable. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yes, yes. And then, of course, those of us who've been looking into the nature of reality and what's really going on here recognize that it's all for our good in the end. Um, and that's something we deem unfavorable, or even in self-reflection, we say, "Oh, I wish I wouldn't have said that," or
Hmm.
"Man, I could have said that differently or done that differently." Ultimately, if we broaden the linear time horizons out, and in retrospect, generally we can look back on our actions, inactions, favorable or not, as beneficial to the trajectory of our life.
Hmm.
At least I would suggest, based on my experience. Some of the things that I've dealt with when I was in my early 40s, for example, at the time were devastating, and now I
Mm.
would view them as the most important time in my life. And despite the pain and suffering that I went through, it was a very necessary part of my evolution.
Yeah. The pain and suffering made you a Jedi. Fall into the dark side, you mustn't. Anyway, so moving on now then, because we were segueing to Jupiter anyway. Moving on now to Jupiter. So Jupiter, of course, being the mythology of the Roman god by the same name, or Jove, as is known as well, is the Greek Zeus, correct? So what are the characteristics and what does it regulate in an individual? Usually I see, Jupiter described a bit vaguely as expansion and that kind of thing, but that's a bit vague to me. So, how would you describe it from your perspective, more concretely than, the nebulousness of saying, oh, it's the expansion, right? How would you describe it?
Yeah. Yeah, well, as we mentioned earlier, it's the great benefic. And
Mhm.
so it tends to bring that to which we are seeking, or hoping for, wishing for. When Jupiter is around, um, uh, you know, I've actually had some interesting experience of Jupiter of late. Jupiter brings to us what is needed. Uh, and sometimes that lines up with what we want, and sometimes it doesn't. And
Mhm.
so that's a really important distinction, I think, to make. Again, like Jupiter does expand. It expands the good and the bad. If we are if we have indulgent tendencies, for example, um, uh, towards, say, um, well, an indulgence towards anything, eating food,
Mhm.
drinking alcohol, sex, what have you. When
Mhm.
Jupiter's around, it intends to increase said indulgence. We're apt to, if a little bit is good, that means a lot must be better. And if a lot is better, then man, just bring it on. Keep my tab open. Um, I'm going to be here all night, type of thing. And so
Right.
one of the downsides of Jupiter is actually people who have really, quote unquote, harmonious aspects to Jupiter can get into trouble because things aren't so bad. And when things aren't so bad, we celebrate, right?
Right.
Of course, when things are bad, we can tend to wallow in our sorrows, and therefore we can wallow uh, quite extensively when Jupiter's around. So this expansion's
Hmm.
a two-way street. Um, it's uh, it's it's in an exaltation in Cancer. So it likes to be in the watery, loving, motherly, nurturing sign of Cancer.
Hmm.
It's uh, as you pointed out, it's associated with the God that gives. You know, with um, so Jupiter is in its joy. What we spoke about Venus being in its joy in the seventh house. Jupiter is in its joy in the 11th house, which is right next door here. The 11th
Hmm.
house is the house of our would be our friends or our network. You know, not our direct family, not our direct other, our partner, not our siblings, but the distant family, but really
The tribe,
the
the
tribe,
tribe.
the
Yeah.
friends.
Hmm.
Yes,
Hmm.
yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So, in a sense, Jupiter, therefore, is we could call it the door opener. While, for example, when we get to Saturn, we'll talk about it. But in contrast with Saturn, which would be the door closer, would this be accurate at all to say?
yeah, and it's best reflected by um, returning to that to which it governs or rules. Um,
Mm.
So, as we mentioned already, Jupiter is the ruler of Pisces, the traditional ruler of Pisces, and the Hellenistic astrologer isn't interested in contemporary rulers for what it's worth, although they play an interesting role in interpretation. Um, uh, but for the sake of answering your question, let's talk about the Jupiter as being the ruler of Sagittarius,
Mm.
and the so Sagittarius is naturally in the ninth house, and we haven't got into the ninth house a whole lot, but for the sake of your question of being a door opener, um, yes, Jupiter opens us up to the world, right? And so
Mm.
Jupiter also has to do, we talk about expansion. Well, think about expansion of the type of expansion that happens when we walk through the door to the world.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
when we decide that we want to travel to far off places, when it's time for us to take the hero or the heroine's journey, right? To leave our home, to go find ourselves essentially, but to go to foreign lands and to learn about different cultures and this type of thing. That's a very Jupiterian characteristic. It's a very Sagittarian characteristic. It's a very ninth house characteristic. But Jupiter um, suggests that one is prone to travel, and now this travel can be, I think, back in ancient times. This is jumping on a camel or getting in a
Hmm.
boat. Um, I suppose these days with the tools that we have available to us, it could mean, um, traveling in our mind, literally to far off places, or allowing our studies to open the doors up to texts, say, that emerge out of the East, for example, for those of us who are in the West, that type of thing. It has to do
Right.
with higher mind, um, one's philosophy, um, one's theology, one's cosmology. Those are all
Mm.
topics of Jupiter.
I see. So it is, when you say higher mind, is it related to Mercury in that sense?
Oh, no, now this. Now you're calling me on my assignment of meaning of certain words, right? And
Right.
so, um, when I say higher mind, that would be in contrast to the lower mind. And what I mean by that
Okay.
is
Hmm.
like the instinctual, kind of animalistic, I need to procreate, find food and shelter mind. It's certainly essential. But higher
Hmm.
mind might be higher ideas. Um, the things that come with deeper contemplation that's generally associated, at least in my mind, the way that I frame things is one's intuitive faculty, which tends to connect us to more of the gnosis, um, of allowing us to help us answer questions like who am I, where am I, and why am I?
Right.
Yeah.
And so, a Jupiter, like in this example, in this chart, that is retrograde, as we see there. It's in this case a door opener that is not very talkative, apparently, or not very expansive when it's supposed to be expansive. So how does that, again, another contradiction here, but how does that manifest being retrograde there? I know we've talked about retrograde and we'll go into more depth in a future episode, but how would that, in practical sense, manifest for a Jupiter to be retrograde when it's supposed to be, opening doors? How would that play out?
Mm. Boy, you just threw me a softball there, brother. I'm gonna hit it right out of the damn park, man. I know. As the
Go ahead, man.
I love that question. I really do. And so this okay, we just spoke about cosmology and theology and philosophy and you know in our discussions in our research in our travels in the quest to know the truth of who am I, where am I, and why am I? We've contemplated space, for
Mm,
example, right?
mhm,
We've contemplated and um, those that seemingly have the control over the apparatus that pervades and invades most people's senses um, are leading us to believe that space is somewhere external to us. Well,
mhm,
some of us have contemplated um, it differently. Some of us have contemplated that the journey into space isn't external, but it's internal,
mhm,
right? And so that maybe there's much travel and there's much exploration to be had inside as opposed to outside. Um, we're not encouraged to or incentivized to do that, but some of us go in. We go inward, and as we talked about with Mercury, this retrograde, introspective, reflective um, qualities of the planets in retrograde as they play themselves out in the respective native. In your case, we're talking about you here, in the same way that Mercury, in that aspect of the mind, and everything we spoke about, Jupiter is the same, right? And so this
mhm.
expansive quality um, that may be expressed externally as it's moving directly can literally be considered expanding internally, again,
Right,
in the form of contemplation or investigation,
right.
etc.
Instead of a tree growing leaves, it's growing roots. We could put it like that.
That's a beautiful metaphor. Yeah. Yes.
Hmm.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's a good explanation and a great answer. I think to me at least it clarified what the retrograde in Jupiter would mean, especially in this conjunction being about the intuition and about the Piscean qualities that the Sun and Mars take. Right. So uh, now that we've talked about the door opener, let's talk about the door closer, who is Saturn. Like you say, it has a bad rap and usually treated as the malefic, Satan, and oh, the devil, and oh my God, Saturn is here, and whatever. But okay, in practical terms, what does Saturn regulate and how does it manifest in an individual's chart?
Oh, so lots to say about Saturn. I like to think about Saturn as the headmaster,
Hmm.
the boss. In particular, in the in the traditional ideas of Saturn, it had a little bit different. The ancients had a little bit different understanding of Saturn than some of the contemporaries, and now that we've uncovered, so to speak, or discovered some of these outer planets, Saturn has given some of its meaning, its traditional meaning, over to Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Um, but we're going through the basics here, so I'll try not to get too carried away. But Saturn um, is represents the form. It represents boundaries. It represents restrictiveness,
Hmm.
limits. Um, it can represent things like uh, the limits as given to us by the law.
Mm.
Jupiter, by the way, happens to represent elements of things like the legal system or law. Um, uh, but differently in that Saturn, we are restricted by laws, right? And we are hemmed in, or we have to pay homage to the authority that's given to us by the law or the restrictions or the boundaries. I mean, think about um, nation states and think about the
Mm.
boundaries that are given to the constituents of a certain state in the United States of America or in a certain country. Um, One could say that those weren't naturally given to us. They were arbitrarily given
Hmm.
to us by some system that has been granted authority, um, of which that authority has been ultimately been granted to by us,
Yes.
the component parts, us humans, in the first
Hmm.
place. But so that is it's Saturnian. Saturn is. Let me just pause there because there's so many different directions that we can go in. Anything coming up? Do you want to ask a question or take us in a certain direction, or shall I continue?
No, I wanted to explore because Saturn is and even, in what you call the contrarian field, I mean, call it truth or conspiracy, whatever, it doesn't matter. But Saturn plays a key role because Saturn is associated with Satan, and it is said that the system is of Saturn and therefore it is satanic. When people perhaps don't understand that the satanic that they are referring to is perhaps more Jupiterian than Saturnian, because it is about indulgence. For example, something which I consider to be complete narrative myself, but is in the narrative of the world stage nonetheless. Something like, for example, the Epstein files has nothing to do with Saturn. The Epstein files is Jupiterian. It's the expansion of that particular type of indulgence, of transgressive indulgence. And again, I state that I'm not taking it as a fact, but as a narrative value, right? The value that a story takes up in our psyches to give us an artificial direction and make us miss out, perhaps, on our own individual introspective journey. But it's got that bad rap, and perhaps it is time to, reclaim the good qualities of Saturn. Sometimes you do require, limit. You from this line beyond, you can't pass, right? But you can't go and do whatever you like. It has consequences, that kind of thing. So I think it would be a good time, Noble, to set things right in that regard, because people are, led by words and symbols, and they see a demonic figure drawn by AI. Nothing against, because even our thumbnail is drawn by AI, but these demonic figures, oh Saturn, oh it was the devil and it's ridiculous, in my opinion. It's ridiculous to consider things like that. We all have quote unquote angels, we all have quote unquote demons, and it's about this self-discovery, not about this external demonic army out there just waiting to, ruled by this man with a scythe, right, ready to cut us down. It's ridiculous. So I really wanted to, set things straight about Saturn, and of course later on we'll have to set things straight about Pluto as well, because it also gets a bad rap. But yeah, that would be the direction.
Well, if if Saturn is the headmaster, Pluto's the henchman. And right. And
Yeah.
and yes, Pluto does get a bad rap as well. But yeah, thank you for that segue and that bridge. And because it's I think it's important for us to think about Saturn in a much different way. So let's do it. And we are exploring essentially a hermetic art. It's astrology is it's an esoteric tool. For many moons, it was occulted and hidden, and only the privileged had access to this information. And now the the masses do. And I would say that it's been diluted, um, and it's been co-opted and whatnot. But this is available to all of us. And as you pointed out, it with that, it's these the characteristics of the planets and the signs and the houses and the systems themselves have been um uh like misrepresented, I think is the word that I'm looking
Hmm.
for. So let's get into
Hmm.
Saturn. So the Saturn would literally represent the supersuit in that which we dwell. It literally represents the body. Now,
Hmm.
Saturn is the ruler of both Capricorn and Aquarius, right? Two
Hmm.
very different signs. Let's talk about Capricorn for a minute. Capricorn is cardinal. Let's just go. It's Earth, cardinal Earth, cardinal as opposed to fixed. Cardinal is Aries, for example, is cardinal. It takes action. It initiates. Whereas fixed would be well, associated more with the bull, and it's hard to move a bull, so therefore it's fixed or stationary. So earthy things, um actually earthy things tend to be more stationary, more dense, more fixed. Of the earth signs, uh Capricorn is the one that can take action, or is more movable than the other earth signs. That's not entirely true. I mean, just Virgo itself is mutable, therefore it's flexible, therefore it's capable of movement. Um, but
But
I
it's
digress.
probably not. But it's probably not initiatory, as Capricorn would be. Perhaps that would be a better word.
Yeah, it tends to react to the environment, maybe.
Right.
Like
Hmm.
it,
Yeah.
it, it, it may, maybe even seeks out external stimuli, but then it reacts to what it sees, this type of thing.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
so therefore, yeah. And so Saturn is literally some would say, I mean, we've heard it in our circles, right? The cage of the prison that we live in, literally like the body. And so
Hmm.
Saturn represents, as I mentioned earlier, the form, whereas Neptune, and we'll get to that, and I think we spoke to that a little bit. Neptune represents the unseen, the essence, that which animates the body or the form. And so, I mean, I think we can argue that or we can make a pretty sound argument that in the that there is some real value and real benefit to us, in quotes, our essence, our soul, that which we really are, having the beautiful opportunity to be in a body, to take on human form. I mean, it's overused a bit these days, but we are spiritual beings having a human experience, right? There's lots of things that we can sort out in this dense material realm. We can experience things in a body that we can't experience in the absence of said body. And so, even though a lot of us, in particular, those of us who have been around the block for a while, old souls, so to speak, like yourself, and those of us who are trying to investigate um, that which dwells within, that which animates, etc., sometimes we can feel as though Saturn is a prison, or it's too restrictive, you know, and that's why many of us these days, if you think about it, are seeking out plant medicines and
Hmm.
psychedelics, and are working very specifically on lucid dreaming, or deep meditation to try to transcend the limitations of Saturn, the limitations of the body ironically, one would argue that's been there, done that, that journey isn't to exit or transcend or travel outside of the body, but in fact, it is actually to go deeper
Inward.
into
Yes.
d-
Sorry, I said inwards, inwards. So,
yeah.
okay.
So at any rate, so yeah, Saturn is associated with it's the ruler of Capricorn, and Capricorn, boy, Capricorn is the if there's a sign that represents the governance systems, the institutions, the organizations, the public entities, like people who have Capricornian, strong Capricornian placements build structures that last. They build temples, or they build the White House or the Capitol building, or the structures that are governed from within those, right? Those are Capricornian. And if we think about the devil card, and if you think about the devil with its horns, and the two beings that are chained to the neck, or whatever, or by the neck to the devil, we tend to, the more Capricornian we are, the more that we spend in the material world, the more that we craft these three-dimensional dense forms, these Saturnian forms on this earth, the less likely we are to go on the exploration that doesn't require any of that inward exploration. And so the message of, say, for example, the devil card is that we can get trapped by the three-dimensional Capricornian, Saturnian, I guess you could say, the trappings of those. We can get trapped in those, or in the systems that govern those. That makes
Yes.
sense?
Well, I would say three things to that. The first one is that the tarot cards of the devil, the people that are chained have loose chains. They can easily come out. They just need to remove. The chains are not tight around their bodies, so they can just remove the chains and go explore. Nothing is holding them back, except their own perception or their own belief. The second thing I would like to say is that my mother was Capricorn, and there was always, some sort of conflictual energies between us. I have since then come to terms with that, and I have delved inwards and understood her role, and also her position in this life, let's say, and in my journey. And another thing that I would like to say is that a different type of Capricorn from that description that you gave is seen, for example, in Linda. Linda Curtis is Capricorn, and she's one of our tribes. These things are, can be and will be and should be tempered by that inner journey we all are supposed to take. And maybe I'm talking like this because I have so many retrogrades, as you can see in the chart. Maybe that's why. And maybe that is my role, is to have all these retrogrades and present this introspective journey as the most important one, which doesn't mean that it's one size fits all. Another person may need to explore outwardly. But these things are not absolutely deterministic. And even, for example, I mean, and let me be a bit controversial here if I can. We've heard a lot about in these circles about, the Moon Saturn matrix, or Saturn Moon matrix, something like that. Like this is the reality is a prison ruled by Saturn and the Moon. And you know, I've been there. I know how that feels like, and I know why it would be seen that way. And what I came to realize, and what I would say to those people, with a good heart, would be when you are able to escape that Saturn Moon matrix, send me a postcard with instructions. Until then, I will continue to observe because what I have found is that this world is not a prison physically in the sense, yeah, we have bodies and limitations, but that is not a prison. The prison is in our perception of our physicality and our perception of our organic selves. And the prison is merely made up of misperception and beliefs and false memories, which, are related. So, yeah, Saturn does get a bad rap, but it is essential because without boundaries, there's no self-knowledge. I can't individualize something that doesn't have a border, right? In a sense of, this, for example, you are now sitting in your home, I am supposing. Your home has a border. There's a front door for a reason, right? Otherwise, you would just live under a tree somewhere, and any other one or any other animal or anything could just come in, right? We have shelters for a reason, and Saturn also regulates the shelter. That's why its complementary sign is Cancer, who is the representation of the actual home, right? So one is perhaps the home turned inward, and the other one is the home turned outward. So how does that family, how does that home, manifest in society? So yeah, I think that the idea, for me at least, was to, when we touched upon Saturn, to set things straight about many of the misconceptions. I don't know if you have anything to comment or if we move to Uranus.
Yeah, no, there's more to be said about Saturn, and
Okay.
but I think that you bring up some really good points, and it's just a reminder when you were speaking about Linda, for example, or your mother.
Hmm.
It's an important reminder that we are not our sun sign. I mean, we've just
Hmm.
indicated that is the reason, again, why we're doing this series, is so that people can become more acquainted with the entirety of their natal chart, so that they can see, beyond the sun, and like, and yes, we are, um, there's multiple fractals or multiple octaves of the various significations or characteristics of these things. Your mother, if she had a strong Capricornian placements, certainly wasn't building the capital or was not the CEO of a public company or something to this nature. So
Hmm.
yes, I think that that was a really important distinction, or a good reminder for us, um, that we need to look at the whole. And um, so at any rate, Saturn, often we hear about the Saturn return. This is an important topic of conversation, I think, that we should bring up.
Hmm. Hmm.
So Saturn takes 29.4 years to go around, to make one evolutionary cycle around the sun. And uh, some people will say Saturn returns are at 27 and it's associated with the 27 club, or 28. And the simple fact of the matter is your literal Saturn return. In other words, where it comes back to the place where it was. In your case, is that was at 9 degrees of um,
Virgo. Hmm.
Virgo. It's
Hmm.
it's 29.4 years, right? And so when somebody describes their Saturn return or the Saturn return, and maybe, oh man, my life went to shit when I was 28, it's because these slow moving planets, when um they, because they're slow, we can feel them as they make their approach, and they make their approach slowly. And so oftentimes we feel what arises in us in the way of our Saturn return for a year or year and a half before the exactitude of 29.4 years. And it lingers sometime well after Saturn moves on from the point at which it was when we were born. And so that can be a 2.5, 3 year process, depending on where we're at. And so now let's go back to Saturn being the headmaster, right? I would say that the headmaster, in the most altruistic highest expression of what the headmaster is supposed to be, has the student's um, best interest in mind, right? Unfortunately, the
Mm.
headmaster has been depicted as quite the opposite in some cases. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that the headmaster has our best interest in mind. That's the way that I like to think of Saturn, the headmaster, right? And so
Hmm.
you're in your late 20s, and you're walking down a road, and the road is not lined up with the purpose of this incarnation, or your dharma, as they would say in the East, your reason for being. Let's say you've gotten yourself into some real bad habits. It could be just sheer out laziness, or perhaps you're in acute addiction with some kind of substance, and you're kind of moving in a perpendicular away from your reason for being on this particular incarnation. When Saturn approaches, when it comes back to the point it was in your chart, which is an indication, by the way, of areas in our life that we need to pay attention to. And that's important. And we're going to come back to that many times.
Hmm.
If we are astray, this is when Saturn kicks our ass. This is when Saturn sends out his henchmen, Mars and Pluto, to get us back on track, to basically the wake up call, the slap across the face, or the absolute ass whooping. And so many of us, because of the indoctrination, because of the programming, because of this notion that we need to be materialistic, or we need to make money, or we need to be beautiful, or all of these material kind of um, social norms that we're dealing with today,
Hmm.
because we're trying to please our parents and society and our friends and everything, we are, when we're 27, 28 years old, moving in the wrong direction. So we do get our ass kicked. There is a course
Hmm.
correction. And so that's why Saturn kind of gets another reason why it gets a bad rap. But I would argue, and based on many of the 40 somethings that I've spoke, that the charts I've read, or the 50 something older folk that had this very difficult Saturn return, um, look back in retrospect, or in hindsight, in reflection, as the most important part of their life, or one of them, because it got them back
Hmm.
on track. And
Well,
so,
I'll tell you something. So my Saturn return back when I was late 20s uh, was actually a great period in my life. It gave me structure in the sense that, I felt that structure was a bit lacking, and it gave me that structure. I met a person that shared life with me for, uh, I don't know, 13 years as a couple, and then, as friends beyond that. And I know that it will be a friend for life. I mean, I have only, it was a great period of discovery as well. Um, I don't know. Yeah, I left a lot of things behind, but these were things I was willing to let go of anyway. So, in my particular case, and of course, each individual will experience it differently, just like you stated. But in my particular case, I look back into my Saturn return back then, and it was great. You know, I only have, it was a really great time in my life. There was really no big, cataclysms like usually is associated.
beautiful. And that is the case. And then you said it gave you some necessary structure.
Yes.
That
Mhm.
is the very quote definition that we've been discussing for Saturn. So yeah, it doesn't have to be imprisonment, or incarceration, or
Mhm.
institutionalization, or the bottom of the barrel type of thing. No, certainly not. It's but yeah, no, I think you said it very, very well. You have Saturn in the 12th. Um, the 12th house is the 12th house of Virgo. It's right in fairly close proximity to your north node of destiny. And
Mhm.
so the 12th house gets into topics like retreat, or imprisonment actually, or
Mm,
incarceration, and it's kind of its lower octave, a retreat, self-retreat, self-undoing, all of the individuation that we have endeavored to express, like we were speaking of in the fifth house and that type of thing, in our
mhm,
career and our incarnation in our life. Ultimately, towards the end of the journey, we get less interested in being the individual wave of the ocean, and we want to return to be the ocean. And so,
mhm,
because you have Saturn there, you need to, if you're not already, um, to be mindful of the need to do everything that we've been talking about for you for pretty much the entirety of this conversation, which is to uh, retreat. Just think about the word. It's retrograde, retreat,
mhm.
recapitulation, reflection, retreating where? I would argue that retreating into the self, basically
Yeah.
retreating in. And so, and you do that, maybe you don't go into a physical retreat location like many people do,
Mhm.
like I do, for example. It seems to me that on the regular, you retreat inside, inside to
Yes.
your contemplations. And Saturn necessitates that. And had you not, if you'd been more prone to externalization, Àrmunn, well, then
Mhm.
you may have had a different experience with some of these, either the Saturn return or some Saturnian transits that have affected your chart over the years.
Yes,
Um,
and even the Saturn there is retrograde. So, but you were talking about retreat, and one of the things that is a part of how my psyche works is that even if I am doing something else, it is often the case that I'm in retreat. And it seems like I'm there, but I'm not. That kind of thing. Like my psyche is uh, wandering inside, sort of, putting the pieces of the puzzle where I think they should be, while my lower mind, or whatever you want to call it, is doing something else, right? So it would be often the case that I would, for example, be driving and I would arrive at my destination without really noticing. So, oh, I'm here, and in the meantime, so when I returned to the lower mind, I didn't even notice the journey, right? And so I went on sort of automatic, driving the car and so on and so forth, as an example, right? But whatever, it often happens that whatever I am doing, it may occur that is basically a placeholder retreat, right? Not a formal type of retreat necessarily, where you sit down and you meditate or etc. But that anytime, any place, a retreat can happen, and it's not something that I plan again. So it's very unexpected in that regard.
well, your driving metaphor, I think, is a really good one, and um, in fact, I use it all the time. It's humans have this ability to drive long distances, have a sandwich, maybe even listen to a podcast and carry on a conversation with the person in the car with us all at the same time, among other things.
Hmm.
And we have this incredible subconscious mind where in fact in the higher octaves that it can be a very beautiful thing, just like what is expressed in the lower octave. I think it's that which within us that can be programmed, right? And
Yes.
that is
Hmm.
programmed or indoctrinated when we're youngsters, um or starting when we were youngsters generally, and then and just leading up and until we come to and start to recognize what the hell is going on when our conscious mind takes over, and then we start to recover everything out of the unconscious or subconscious and bring it up into the light of day. Which leads me to my uh, I guess last thought that I'd like to share in this particular video. I think we should change the or excuse me, move the transpersonal planets to the beginning or as the first topic of our next video.
Hmm.
But we talked a little bit about Saturn, um, in its relation to Capricorn. What we didn't do is talk about Saturn as the ruler of Aquarius.
Right,
And we
right.
we we spoke of your fifth house earlier, and we spoke about the importance of Venus in your chart as your ascendant ruler, and some would say your chart ruler, and that's those Venusian qualities, the symmetry, the virtue itself, the one's values, beauty, sensuality, etc. Um, is being relevant and important to the character we call Àrmunn. But we also suggested that Venus maybe is a little bit at odds, or is a little bit maybe unable to be fully expressed in the proximity to Aquarius. And we talked about the fixed masculine air qualities of Aquarius. But let's talk about the Saturnian qualities. In fact, what I want to do, and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot too much here, but let's
Mhm.
tap into that intuitive nature of yours. And I'm sure you've contemplated this because it's not our first discussion about your fifth house. But how do you feel as though that Saturn is representative of your kind of some of these fifth house characteristics, which have, again, play into you as the native because Venus is so important to you as a whole?
Well, I think that to answer that, I have to go a bit into my view, into the view of the signs. And there's a misconception with the axis of Leo and Aquarius. And this misconception is that Leo is individuality and Aquarius is the group. And I see this differently. I think this is the axis of individuality, but two different types of individuality. If Leo is an individuality that is absorbent in the sense a Leo requires an audience, right? Requires admiration in the sense of, yeah, oh, he's so great, he's wonderful, he's marvelous, etc., which is not a bad thing. We're not talking bad or good or whatever. Aquarius is individuality as well, but it's externalized. It doesn't require the presence of an audience. Even alone, the Aquarius is still that same individual, and therefore it's fixed, as you said. So that said, it seems that the Venusian influence of Aquarius, or the Aquarian influence on Venus, let's say, does give it I know what I like, I know what I value, regardless of the rest. Which doesn't, I mean, sometimes gets me in trouble. So I'm not saying as this is, wow, it's wonderful. But it does give me, a anchor in the sense of values, if you like, right? So, for example, several times I had, people advise me, yeah, but you should, involve money in some way in your endeavors, right? And this is something that I have realized myself that would be counter to my values. And this is not to say that I judge those who do. Uh, what I'm saying is that for my path to involve money in, the contemplations or the conversations or whatever that I do, that's why, for example, I wrote a book about these subjects and I offered it for free. The other book is fiction. Yes, that I put out for sale, but even that at a lower price. And people usually see this as, oh, you're devaluing yourself. No, I disagree. I completely think it's the inverse. It is because I value what I'm presenting that I offer it for free, right? Because if I am asking money for something, if I am at the beginning of the exchange demanding something in return, even before, because I can give you something and then you decide by yourself to give me something back. That is completely different. But if I begin by saying, okay, Noble, I'm going to give you this, but before you give me money, right? I am devaluing the exchange that is going on. I am saying that, my offer to you has the purpose of the exchange and not my offering per se. You understand? So, with this example, I just tried to give you that these are the fixed qualities that influence Venus. And I think that they are very Saturnian in that regard. And I think that the unexpectedness that is associated with Aquarius comes from the fact that the Aquarian individual, who is an individual, he is not diluted in a group as usually is said. This particular type of individual is an individual that is himself regardless of what is around and regardless of the pressure or the advice or whatever would be considered more appropriate or and so that's why Aquarians are seen as eccentric sometimes, right? Because they don't really care about some of the norms that they are given and that kind of thing. I don't know if I was able to answer your question, but that would be my answer.
Well, by all means, and you did it quite well. I think, and you gave me some things to think about, and so let's start a little bit with your understanding of Leo and this access.
Mhm.
And I would frame it up similarly that ultimately, yes, the tendency, I guess you could say the majority of the evidence that I'm seeing when I'm working with various people and their charts is that yes, the quality within a Leo that needs an audience, that needs to be expressed. That said, is I would suggest that those who have fully harmonized, that fully balanced themselves into their center,
Mhm.
and where the sun is shining, it doesn't matter who's around. You're right. I mean, it's like which is ironically is kind of expressing what I think you were just trying to express with regards to like this kind of Aquarian ideal, which is on the same axis. And so, yeah, no, your thoughts are well taken. And you were trying to help us parse out the paradox of Aquarius because
Mhm.
uh, Aquarius is ruled by Saturn, as we pointed out, and you expressed some of the characteristics of Saturn. Um, what you also suggested is that there is a progressive quality or an eccentric quality or a which is very Uranian. And so a lot of contemporary astrologers, modern astrologers, would say that the ruling planet of Aquarius is Uranus. And
Mhm.
so we do seem to have a paradox. My father has a son in Aquarius, and my mother always used to say that he was 50 years ahead of his time. And that
Mhm.
was about 45 years too much for her. He was
Mhm.
quite eccentric and quite different in a very non-traditional and whatnot, but not neither good nor bad. But yeah, no, I thank you for your understanding of yourself and that access. And um, yeah, I think we covered a lot today. Was there anything else you want to say as we wrap it up?
No, just that it's a pleasure to do this series with you. I think we're going somewhere with it. So that is the most important thing. Of course, next episode we'll pick up with Uranus, right? We'll start with the non-personal or transpersonal or whatever. Although trans, we have to be careful with that word nowadays, because
Yeah.
you've spent this episode basically in a very diplomatic way calling me a pussy. So with all the water signs and oh, it's softened and it's this and it's that. I mean, we have to be careful with trans word because we might get in trouble. But yeah, we'll start the next episode there. It's a great pleasure, Noble, to do this series with you, and I think it will be very informative, and it is being already very informative. I hope you're enjoying it too.
Oh man, and hey, we're in the fifth house, bro. We're having fun. We're just sixth house serving others, in the fifth house having fun. So, um, yeah, thanks again for the invitation, and look forward to the next one.
Yeah, me too. Thank you, man, and thank you for all for listening. And I hope to see you here in the next episode. Thank
Ch
you.
Cheers for now. Bye bye.